Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, August 30th, 2019. All eyes are on Florida as we head into the three-day Labor Day weekend. Unpredictable Hurricane Dorian could hit the coast sometime between Monday and Wednesday, and the actual landing spot is still to be determined. That puts a lot of people on edge, on alert, and looking for extra sources of water and food. Here on the West Coast, there is a battle over legislation in Sacramento which would change the status of gig workers, especially people who work for Uber, Lyft, and similar companies that use their employees, exploit them, without giving them the benefit of being full-fledged employees. As you probably know, your local Uber or Lyft driver is an independent contractor. And the companies say this is what drivers really love because they can set their own hours. And if the law forces them to treat them as employees, the companies argue that that's going to go away. And the polite way of saying it is this is a false argument. In street terms, it's bullshit. And these companies have skated for years now. I know the rules of independent contractor status very well. There is 19-point criteria developed by the IRS. And states can modify that, and that's what's at play here in California. But under the federal IRS rules, an independent contractor sets his or her own hours, has their own tools, and essentially is not an employee of the company. But the way Uber and Lyft operate, with the exception of scheduling, people are employees who volunteer to provide their own vehicle to save the company's oodles of cash. So AB 5 is in the legislature, and it's in the final stages now. There's a lot of back and forth on a daily basis. Governor Gavin Newsom has finally gotten involved, and he's been meeting with labor groups and with representatives of the tech companies. And the companies have decided a two-pronged strategy. One is they are threatening to take this to the ballot in November 2020. They've already identified a war chest of $90 million. That is supposed to intimidate the legislature into giving Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash an exemption from AB 5. Their desire is to avoid treating their workers as employees, and they're sweetening the pot. They're offering drivers a guaranteed minimum of $21 an hour. There's some fine print there. Drivers would still pay their own expenses, gas, insurance, maintenance. Well, I guess the companies do provide insurance now while the drivers are working for Lyft or Uber. In addition, the companies would set up a driver benefits fund, which is like a portable pension or health care system. I think that's a great idea. And they're also offering a brand new concept for the United States, what's called sectoral bargaining, in which workers across an industry join forces via organized labor to communicate their agenda to companies. Now, that is kind of a breakthrough because this is collective bargaining and this is unionization. And I would frankly think that these companies are more allergic to unions than they are to treating their drivers as employees. So this has drawn a lot of ink, a lot of attention here in California. And I want to commend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If she had balls, they would be made of brass. Because she has called out retired California Senator Barbara Boxer. Boxer has become a paid lobbyist for Lyft, and she wrote an op-ed that was published the other day in the San Francisco Chronicle, and I cringed when I read it. She's just serving up the talking points of Lyft and Uber, claiming that she met with a bunch of drivers and that their number one interest is retaining the ability to set their own schedules. And so Ocasio-Cortez called out former Senator Boxer in a tweet, quote, "Former officials should not become corporate lobbyists in letter or spirit. It's an abuse of power plus a stain on public service. I don't care if it's a Democrat doing it, both parties do. In fact, that makes it worse. We're supposed to fight for working people, not against them." And she was responding to a tweet from Avi Asher Shapiro, who is or was a reporter for Vice News. He tweeted, "I somehow missed this. Former Democratic Senator Boxer got a job with Lyft and is now writing op-eds opposing labor regulations in California that would extend employment rights to Lyft and Uber drivers." And I also want to note that our friend and colleague Steve Horn has been following this legislation, and he has concerns about negative impacts on freelance journalists like himself. So this bill is still in flux, and Senator Boxer's participation here is tawdry. That's how I would put it. And last night, without really thinking about AOC and this specific angle, I posted on a couple of Facebook posts. One from a local cab driver I know named Barry Toronto, and he put up a negative message about Lyft. And I posted thusly: "I drove a taxi for a few weeks between jobs, and it left me with lots of respect for cab drivers. It's criminal that regulators and elected leaders have let Uber and Lyft compete with medallion holders who paid bigly to offer a safe, regulated service with reasonable limits on competition. I propose reparations. You," I'm talking to Barry the cabbie, "and all experienced taxi drivers should get free shares in Uber and Lyft." That would be one way of trying to level the playing field and repair the damage that has been done to cabbies. The San Francisco Chronicle recently profiled a man who's in his 60s. He paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for a taxi medallion that is now worthless. Nobody wants to buy them. And he has a term loan that has been called by the bank, and he has to cough up the full amount that is outstanding on that loan. Then my Facebook friend Lisa Maldonado, who is a labor union official here in California, she put up the link to an article that I've linked to at Common Dreams that depicts AOC's response to Senator Boxer. And I wrote on that post, "I cringed when I read Boxer's op-ed for Lyft, where she talked about how drivers want to set their own schedules, falsely suggesting that they can't be treated better as employees and still have flexible hours." And I noted that there are many union contracts where the hourly rate, the terms of employment, uniforms, attitude, all kinds of things are spelled out in the contract, but the actual schedule of work is left to mutual agreement by the parties. Here's another tech surveillance concern, and it gets covered both in The Guardian of Great Britain and in BuzzFeed News online here in the U.S. And the issue is Amazon's subsidiary called Ring. And Ring has 98% of the market for home doorbell cameras. Now, I would never put one of these on my front door, but apparently millions of people around the world have already done this. And Ring, owned by Amazon, is now engaging police departments, over 400 of them across the country. And they are basically offering free cameras and other inducements to the police departments in order to get them to market Ring to local people who are concerned about crime in their neighborhood. And the company Ring offers essentially bonuses to police departments who get local citizens to download the app called Neighbors by Ring app. Now, this allows the police department to access videos submitted by subscribers of Ring. And Ring has a system where you can, under certain circumstances, watch videos or the live cameras of your own neighbors. Now, this concerns me greatly. I understand people who are willing to submit to surveillance because they think it makes them safer. But I, of course, am fearful and skeptical of a muscular police state in this country. And as we see Ring even reviewing press releases that police departments put out about the Ring systems, the outsized control that they are exercising reminds me of Stingray. That is the cell phone surveillance system. And the non-disclosure agreements that Stingray executed with the local police departments that use that technology. And Andrew Ferguson, a law professor, says the purpose of this kind of commentary, the public communications that are approved by Ring, is to fuel a narrative that these devices are effective in stopping crime, that there's a high rate of crime, and thus people need these devices, and police support a particular brand of camera over other brands of camera. All of these are questionable choices for a public safety organization that should have a primary purpose of serving public safety and not corporate marketing. Now, over to the BuzzFeed coverage. Ring is denying that it currently uses facial recognition software through the cameras that people install on their front doors. Quote, Ring does not use facial recognition technology. BuzzFeed notes, while Ring devices don't currently use facial recognition technology, Ring's Ukraine arm appears to be working on it. They have a head of face recognition research, and they have given talks, promotional talks, about their development of facial recognition technology. BuzzFeed notes that after months of public pressure, Ring has disclosed partnerships with 405 U.S. police departments, more than double what they had previously admitted. So there is some secret activity here that's supposed to occur beyond our view. And it appears that Ring, a subsidiary of Amazon, which also owns Rekognition, with a K instead of the C in recognition, and that is a facial recognition development company. If you sign up for Ring in the terms of service, you give the company an irrevocable, perpetual license to the video content that users post on the Neighbors app. So, once again, Amazon is like a big brother. And we need to keep a real sharp eye on the personal assistants like Alexa and Siri linked to these cameras that people freely install in their homes, either uncaring or unaware of the potential abuse of this by wayward cops. But I got more tech news for you today. Google's researchers at Project Zero, their job is to identify vulnerabilities, not just in Google products. So they've been hacking into iPhones, and they discovered a significant vulnerability that has been available for at least 2 years. And they won't name these certain websites, but if you use your iPhone and visit certain websites, it drops malware, an implant. And that allows them to collect your password keychains, messages, address books, and other personal information from the apps on your phone. Now, there is a limit to the malware's power. If you turn the phone power off and restart it, it will free the user from the malicious websites unless they return to one of them. So we live in an era of vulnerabilities, and we have government actors and commercial actors who are openly exploiting those vulnerabilities, and we aren't always sure why. But we are their targets. The Democratic National Committee has revised the terms of the Iowa caucus. And I had told you recently that in order to expand participation in the caucuses beyond people who can physically come out to a high school gym on a winter night, they were setting up virtual caucuses, which included voting by phone and the use of ranked choice voting. So you pick your favorite presidential nominee, and then you list 2 or 3 or 4 more. And if your first choice doesn't make it, then they reallocate your votes according to your ranked choice preference. Now, this report in the New York Times indicates that because they feared hackers, and Russian hackers, would mess with the phone-in voting in the caucuses, they have decided to block that. Now, there is no indication in this report whether the ranked choice voting will continue as a test or not. But I consider this to be hysteria. Now, I don't know the details of how the virtual caucuses were supposed to work. But it's easy enough to establish that a certain voter has a unique PIN number or other identifying password that has to be entered before they can vote in the caucus. Now, I think those risks could be managed. But the hysteria over Russian hacking has the Democratic Party operating from a position of fear. I want to commend Kevin Gostola over at Shadowproof. He always has an interesting take on certain developments. And with yesterday's announcement that the Justice Department's Inspector General was slapping the wrist of James Comey, but no charges would be filed for his intentional leaks of his own memos regarding his meetings with Trump. And Gostola properly notes that the Inspector General didn't recommend prosecution for Comey and that this fits into the two-tiered justice system that exists for federal employees in the United States. And fundamentally, when a high-ranking government official wants to leak, he or she can do so and not fear prosecution. But when principled whistleblowers from Ed Snowden to Chelsea Manning to Reality Winner to John Kiriakou and Jeffrey Sterling, these are people who are or have served prison time after pleading guilty to minor violations of security protocols, at least in the case of Kiriakou and Sterling. And it's true, we have a double standard. And people like David Petraeus, Hillary Clinton, Leon Panetta, they all mishandled classified information, and not a one of them paid a price for it. Well, Petraeus was forced to resign, but there was no further prosecution. And I must regretfully note that Chelsea Manning remains imprisoned on a bogus contempt charge for refusing to testify before the WikiLeaks grand jury, which has already returned its indictments. It is a huge miscarriage of justice. And another story on the leak side. Donald Trump's personal assistant in the White House, Madeleine Westerhout, or Hout, I never heard of her before. She got the treatment from the Apprentice superstar yesterday. She was told, "You're fired." Accused of sharing information about the Trump family with reporters recently at an off-the-record dinner when Trump was on a working vacation at his New Jersey golf club. Now, I don't know the details that she is alleged to have leaked, but when you consider that 2.5 years into this administration, the incredible leaks that have occurred, and this is the first person who's been directly fired for, what appears to be leaking. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Paul Karsh, Joe Carson, Marvin Rasmussen, and Abby McMillan. They are generous supporters of this podcast, and most of them have been doing it for years. You can join them. I want to invite you to do so. El Jefe, a guy named Jeffrey, just took out a new annual subscription yesterday. Thanks, Jeffrey. And you can do it too. All you got to do is hit peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. You hit the sign-up page. You can choose the level of support that is comfortable for you. And I've got bonus books if you take out a new annual subscription and give me a mailing address in the continental U.S. And today I'm releasing for my subscribers a recent video interview from my local TV show here in Marin County, California. And this is a subject that is important to me. Leslie Lakes is the founder of a nonprofit called Prison Arts Touching Hearts. She corresponds with over 100 men and women who are locked up across the country, and she supports their development as artists. And she's a fascinating woman. In the course of the interview, I share stories about my own friendships with death row inmates like James Anderson and Bill Noguera. And I display some of James' remarkable work, the etched domino pendants that he creates, and also a couple of paintings of his, which are, he calls his Afrocentric Confederate flags. So I encourage you to follow the links and watch the video. You'll get to see some of the artwork. Of course, you have the freedom to listen just to the audio, but it will be a richer experience if you see it as a video. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Leslie Lakes of Prison Arts Touching Hearts.
But this started a correspondence communication with some inmates who I still write to and I'm friends with today. And the artwork was just so wonderful, and I wanted them to know, to acknowledge. And one of them, which is a picture right here, can we look at it?
Sure.
This is one of the first pieces that I had won from the Fortune Society's 5th Annual Inmate Art Auction. This is a goldfinch. I think maybe it's a Western goldfinch. It's done with pastel and colored pencil. And I don't know, it just really touched me. That's why I call it Prison Arts Touching Hearts, because artwork is going to touch you in many different ways. And it was just so sweet. And so I won this piece.
It's colorful. It's very well drawn.
And the name of the artist is Keith Harward. And I started a correspondence with him, which has spanned now, that was 2006, 13 years? This man, as I had mentioned, he had been incarcerated for 33 years, claiming that he was innocent. And finally, the Innocence Project got behind him, and with DNA evidence, they conclusively proved that he was indeed innocent. But 33 years of his life was spent behind bars. They did find the man who was guilty, but he had died in another prison since then. But he was released. He was in a Virginia state prison. But this is the piece that pretty much started it all.
You can hear and watch the full interview with Leslie Lakes. It's available for subscribers today at peterbcollins.com and virtually all of our online outlets. And I want to note that one of the unusual things we cover in the interview is that Leslie discovered that there is an Alcatraz East crime museum located in the little town of Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It's about 35 miles southeast of Knoxville. And currently, the Alcatraz East Crime Museum is featuring an exhibit of prison artists' work that has been curated by Leslie Lakes. So I think Joe Carson is the listener who I know is closest to Knoxville. So, Joe, next time you're cruising around, hit Pigeon Forge and check out the Alcatraz East Crime Museum, will you? Well, things are heating up in Hong Kong, and I want to once again acknowledge that we don't know the full dimension of the protests that have really roiled that town for weeks now. But I certainly support the aspirations of the protesters and deplore the tactics of the Beijing government and its toadies in Hong Kong. So early today, Hong Kong time, they cracked down. They arrested 28 people, including Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, who are student leaders of the pro-democracy demonstrations. BuzzFeed reports that those two were released on bail after a couple of hours, which is a bit of a surprise. But the government run by Carrie Lam has canceled a march that was scheduled for tomorrow, We'll see if the citizens of Hong Kong accept that cancellation. And we also note that Beijing has sent a fresh round of thousands of troops into Hong Kong in the last couple of days. Front page of the New York Times today is reporting that in Iran there has been a begrudging acceptance of the need to deal with Trump. The sanctions are having a critical impact, and the strategy of the Iranian leaders is a little complicated. We saw President Rouhani earlier this week first say he was willing to meet with Trump, and then 24 hours later he said, "I'll meet with Trump after the sanctions are lifted." This reportedly depicts a strategy on two tracks, displaying a more defiant position on military and nuclear energy policies to irritate Trump, while signaling a willingness to talk under certain conditions. Well, we'll see how that plays out. But fundamentally, you can't Trump. I just said that the way I said it. You cannot trust Trump. He didn't honor the agreement between 6 nations in Iran that Obama and John Kerry helped execute. And so how can Iran trust him in any future agreement, no matter what the terms, no matter how it is arrived at? I don't see it. I highly recommend an op-ed in today's New York Times under the signature of Imran Khan. He's the Prime Minister of Pakistan. He makes a strong case that ever since he took power and the Modi government took power in India, he has been contacting them and being ignored when he calls for dialogue and peace. He's been focused on Kashmir since before. The Modi government shocked the world and changed the terms for Kashmir's 2 communities in early August. And the world has been silent. There's very little opposition to this grab by the nationalist government of Narendra Modi in India. And Khan writes, "I had hoped that being elected prime minister might lead Modi to cast aside his old ways as the chief minister of the Indian state of Gujarat when he gained global notoriety for the 2002 pogrom against local Muslims on his watch and was denied a visa to travel to the United States. That was fixed by Obama." And he writes, on August 5th, in its most brazen and egregious move, Modi's government altered the status of Indian-occupied Kashmir through the revocation of Article 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution. It's illegal, but more important, it's a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir and the Shimla Agreement between India and Pakistan. If the world does nothing to stop the Indian assault on Kashmir and its people, there will be consequences for the whole world as 2 nuclear-armed states get ever closer to a direct military confrontation. India's defense minister has issued a not-so-veiled nuclear threat to Pakistan, saying that the future of India's no-first-use policy will depend on circumstances. And he demands dialogue, including all stakeholders, including the Kashmiris. Meanwhile, the mess in Britain over Brexit and Boris Johnson gets even more complicated in a highly unusual move. A former Conservative leader, a member of Johnson's own party, John Major, has announced that he will join a legal effort, a lawsuit, to prevent a suspension of Britain's Parliament. The 5-week suspension would give the Parliament very little room to maneuver should Johnson actually get Brussels to concede and make some changes to the agreement they had negotiated with Theresa May. Now, they refused. Parliament couldn't pass it 3 times. And this kind of brinksmanship is going to go right down to the wire in October. In Colombia, the FARC has announced that they are basically stepping away from the 3-year truce with the Colombian government. Both sides argue that the terms of the peace talks, the truce, have not been honored. At least 120 rebels have been killed since the peace deal was signed, and the government had promised to protect those individuals. So it's going to get messy again. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Glenn Greenwald continues to do great reporting, exposing how the anti-corruption prosecutors are quite corrupt themselves, showing once again through text messages that they acknowledged that they had leaked against individuals in an effort to pressure them to plead guilty to phony charges. And I commend Greenwald for taking it on. Also, I want to note that my buddy and Brazilian national Pepe Escobar is appearing this week on Consortium News CN Live to talk about his exclusive interview with former President Lula da Silva, who was locked up by those corrupt anti-corruption prosecutors as part of the car wash investigation. Over the weekend, let me recommend that you check out Jeff Schechtman's podcast at Who, What, Why. He interviews a source I've talked to many times, journalist Nick Bryant, the guy who shared with me Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book all the way back in 2012. You can find my interviews with Bryant if you just insert his name, Nick, B-R-Y-A-N-T, in the search window at peterbcollins.com. I put up a link to the Bryant interview with Schechtman, and you can check it out. And finally today, American justice is supposed to be swift and fair. We say we're a nation of laws. And today, the new military judge at Guantanamo has finally set a trial date for the start of the death penalty trial of the alleged ringleaders of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 others. That would be 19 and a half years after the events in question. It is really a stain on American justice and the false claims we make when we put on our white hats and claim that we are leaders of the world. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Have a great Labor Day weekend. You'll find this on YouTube. And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.